Start it again. Can you talk?
Okay. How's it now?
I'm not sure. Because I must be watching. Okay. No. Okay. Can you talk?
I can talk. I will talk. Yes.
Because I need to know what's
Yes.
working or not.
Okay. Is it working?
Yeah, now working.
It's working, and is it
so.
okay for everybody now?
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay. So
Okay,
earlier
now,
that
yes,
people.
now it's.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more people. Yeah, now.
Yeah.
I was wondering, it's so little people only.
Okay. So once
Okay.
again,
Now
we apologize with this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
thank you,
Vanessa.
Vanessa, especially because you actually alerted us to the fact
Vanessa.
that we have a problem. We had a problem.
Now Vanessa's in, so
Okay.
so happy she's in.
Okay. So, but before that, nobody could hear what I was saying.
Now it's
right?
more people now. It's just.
Okay. So
we should start again.
I will start again. Welcome once again, everyone. We're starting. Yes. And to recapitulate for those of you who were not here, of course, we're convening today in a day of infamy. This is September 11th. This is 19 years since the attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and the aborted attack on the White House. And this is a day of infamy for many reasons, not simply because of the attack on the United States, but because there was a brief opportunity after this attack where the United States had the sympathy of the whole world. And what's the matter?
Sorry, nothing.
To do what? What do I'm?
Sure.
Okay. I'm confused. But anyway, I'll unconfuse myself. So, but instead of building on that sympathy from the world, the United States went on a rogue adventure, we could say, actually, which showed a complete lack of knowledge of and complete lack of understanding of history, of religions, differences of religions, of differences of ethnicity, and in a certain sense, I could say, destroyed the world and created a sort of debacle from which we have not recovered yet. And now, once again, we are sort of teetering on a precipice, and we can have, again, instead of a situation where the world comes together and actually solves these terrible problems that we're having now, just disintegrates. Of course, we have the terrible issue of COVID-19. We have this pandemic, the issues of climate change, the issue of systemic racism, then the issue of this dangerous, slippery slope that we're on towards, I would even say, fascism. There's also the problem of that we are possibly facing a deep worldwide recession or depression, you can say, and that is something which simply requires political will and, I would say, economic understanding. And as I mentioned before, I'm not going to talk about this very much because I'm only a clarinet player. I'm not one of these big experts, so-called, in the field. But I do have certain hobbies, and one of my hobbies is economics, which has been called the dismal science, and there's a very good reason for that. But I should close that window, maybe. Yeah? 1 second. Now it's better. Yeah. And I was thinking about that just now because once again in the United States, the Congress is debated just a little bit this reissuing of this so-called stimulus, which is just giving people a little bit of money to tide them over. And of course, we're not able to come to a meeting of minds, and you have Republicans in the government proposing what's called the skinny stimulus, which is much too little to really do anything. And there are many reasons why people would be against this, and one reason, of course, is that they think that if you give people money, of course they're not going to work. And this is an attitude which very wealthy people have had throughout history when they looked at people who don't have any money, who don't have resources, are not poor. And often these people who are wealthy come from families which have accumulated wealth over generations, so that of course they don't work themselves. Anyway, but there's also a fundamental misunderstanding of what money is. And money is simply an agreement. Money is not a thing, it's not something. Even if we have gold is only valuable because we have agreed that gold is valuable somehow. And there's a very big difference between someone who issues money and someone who just either earns money or gets money. And who issues money? Governments issue money. And what makes money legitimate is that government accepts this money for the payment of taxes. And I'm not going to get into why there are taxes and the reason why taxes actually do not pay for things in the government. But the question of debt, government debt and personal debt, are tremendously different. So we look at the stimulus and people say, well, the government debt is too big. We can't do it. So what does that mean? That you do not support people so that our whole economy contracts, that people become poorer, and basically the standard of living goes down and things become much, much more dangerous, or the government increases its debt, which actually gives, by giving people money, let's say, which allows the economy to actually expand and creates more wealth because people can actually not only survive, but they can actually purchase things, etc., 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 etc. And because of that, the government, which has more debt, actually has the ability to actually function in a better way. You see, so in fact, government debt is not only something good, it's something that is essential. Now I move on from that. Okay, this is a kind of recapitulation. I recapitulate now, and to go to our topic of the day, which has to do with the problems and the interest of original versions of things. And we have been talking about that in connection with basically everything that we have been dealing with. For instance, in Nielsen, I showed how the manuscript clarinet part, which Nielsen gave Oxenwald, was different from the final version, and in how he made certain changes, in my opinion, for technical reasons or for reasons of I should say musical clarification, but perhaps most likely at the behest of Oxenwald. And also there were changes, or I would even call them just mistakes, from which we saw in the publication, which came from, I could say, laziness or incompetence, whatever, of the publisher. So we see this very often, and I want to actually look at this in more detail now. Now, it's not always the case that the original is the best. We don't, because, of course, let's say we are writing a piece of music. We can easily change things. We look at it and we think that, oh, this should be here, and we see in many original versions how composers have changed things. And they can be for questions of form, they can be for questions of clarifying expression, they can be for questions simply of practicality as well. Okay, so we have, for instance, the issues of pieces such as the Brahms Opus 8, his first trio, which exists in two versions, so that he originally wrote it in 1854. It was a very early work, actually huge work, and then he revised it in a very extreme way in 1889, very late. So in effect, they became two different pieces. So in this case, we cannot look at this and say, okay, the original version is right, this one is not, or the second version is correct, the first version should be thrown away. No, because he did not throw that first version away, we should look at these two versions as actually separate pieces. And revisions can have a kind of slope, can be this extreme, or can be extremely minor. But most often it's somewhere in the middle. And there are examples of composers doing this at their own behest, and composers doing this because other people influence them. Brahms, for instance, often asked the advice of Clara Schumann, and also of his friend Joachim when they were friends, about things. And for instance, in the first symphony of Brahms, he had originally written it without the introduction, and when he showed it to Clara, Clara said, Johannes dear, I do think it would be better if you added an introduction. And he did, and that actually made the piece really the kind of monumental piece which it is. The second movement of the first symphony is fascinating because there is an original version, and I don't know why he didn't destroy it. But if you notice it, if you go through it, and I don't have a recording of that here, I didn't think that I should bother with that. But if you look at it, or if you listen to it, you will see that it's more like a compendium of ideas, which then he revised in a very significant way and made into a total piece of music, a composition which hangs together as an entity, as a structure. I will basically be looking at Copland, but I wanted to go through other composers before I do that. And I want to look briefly, for instance, at Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn is aside from the fact that he was a wonderful composer, is interesting because he wrote very quickly, and he basically figured out most things in his head, then wrote very quickly, and then spent a long time revising. And the Italian Symphony is a fascinating case in point because it exists in two versions. The early version was in 1834. I've now all of a sudden the date is flown out of my head, but that is the standard version that's always performed. But there is a second version of that piece because when Mendelssohn looked at the piece he found various problems in it, and he revised it in a very significant way. So it exists as a second version from a year later. Let's just say 1835, but I may be totally wrong about that. And this second version is virtually unknown, but I look at it as much improved over the first version. And I'm reminded of an article of Charles Rosen, who I'm often reminded of various articles of which he wrote. And Charles Rosen, of course, the wonderful pianist, brilliant musical mind, and one of the most important figures in musicology, music theory, etc. I would say in recent times. So he has an interesting article about, also in a certain way, about original versions, but it's basically about mistakes and how what we hear as correct often in music is simply what we're used to. And this actually is not only in music, of course, because there have been many psychological studies done about people, when you try to convince them of something else, that something's a mistake, that rather than actually going and say, oh, okay, that's correct, people will very often actually go kind of retrench in there and maintain that what they believe is actually right, despite the evidence to the contrary. Okay, and with this Mendelssohn Symphony, and I don't know why I still, after many years, have this unfortunate feeling about it, but I have a personal disappointment with it because my, my old chamber orchestra, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, which I devoted many years of my life to, when we were expanding our repertoire to larger works and decided to perform the Italian Symphony of Mendelssohn, I had the great idea that we should do the second version, which I had been looking at myself. And I went to people and I thought that, this would be great because this would probably even be perhaps a Carnegie Hall premiere, maybe a New York premiere, whatever. But what I got in response to that would be people said, oh yeah, I heard that Mendelssohn rewrote it and made it into a terrible piece, etc., etc. So I was never able to get anywhere about this. So now I have my chance to actually show. And just I'm going to talk a little bit of the second movement. Yeah. And I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to play a bit of two performances of this. One first performance of the standard version of this, and I'm just going to play a bit of the beginning, of course, because it's too long. And then I'm going to actually show, in particular little example of why Mendelssohn felt compelled to change the piece. Okay. So, let me go back to this again. There we are. I think that's correct, but I have to keep looking at this. The problem is I've assumed as I leave it, it just stops connecting. Okay, there, and let me make sure. Okay, I think it works. So I have a hope that this is right. Wait. Uh-oh. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Okay, I'll just play that amount. This is the original version, this one that we all know. This way. Okay. And here we have our revision. And let me, I just want to, I want to just make sure that everything is okay here. Sorry. it back to the very beginning. Counterpoint is even better in the okay. Yeah. So just that amount I play. I suggest that all of you try to find a recording of this. This particular one is actually I like it, even though I'm not a complete fan of his. This is Gardner and the Vienna Philharmonic doing this, but one of the very few actual recordings of the second version. Okay, so it is much better, really, much more interesting in terms of phrasing as well, and there's a very important reason. Sorry, I just take this. Why I believe Mendelssohn really felt compelled to change. And let me show you what this is. Okay. I think here is the original. Oh, it's 1833, 1834. I was 1 year wrong.
Tito already told me.
That's right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's 1833. That's I made that's a mistake. Yeah.
Tito commented. Wrote.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have this here. We have first, of course, we have this dun, 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 dun. And then going on. Then we have this here. Sorry, sorry. This is he changed it. Then here. Now listen to this part. Then. That's not great. Do you hear how the voice leading is wrong, and you see in his manuscript looking through things, doing little bit changes, but it didn't work. So that's why. I mean, this is one of the reasons why he ended up then he thought, of course, this is the same. Sorry, I'm so bad. And now here we go. The same. Then it's so much better And not only that, the fact that it does not fully resolve there creates a phrase which moves on, so that we have etc., etc. Don't bother with any more because I need to go on to other things. But you see, we listen carefully and we see how this second 1834 version was not simply something that he thought with it, but he felt that there was big fundamental problems with the first version, even though it's a lively piece. And he ended up writing something which was more complex and much more poignant, not in this movement and then in other movements also. Okay, so I pass from here, and now I move to Robert Schumann. And for this, I think, it's not so terrible. I want to show here. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, this will be all right. I'll keep this here for the moment. And Schumann, there are many examples of first versions, later versions, and Schumann was, of course, very influenced by people around him. And his own, I think, musical sense was always so much more creative and, in a way, ahead of his time, that people often did not understand him. And at the same time, he himself had enough, well, I should say, respect for the people around him that he agreed to many of the changes which his colleagues and his wife Clara, etc., suggested, or even in a certain way maybe demanded. The wonderful example is the Opus 17, the Fantasy, the first in C major which originally ended with a restatement of the Beethoven song that's Ferne Geliebte, my distant beloved, in a wonderfully complex harmonization, which created something very, very special in this piece. And I think that was not so well understood by people around him. And so he ended up getting rid of it and just ending with 2 C major chords. Another case, which involves us personally, has to do with the Opus 73 fantasy pieces of Schumann. And he had originally composed them with the title Soireestücke, those evening pieces, salon pieces, and his original manuscript is very different in respects from what ended up finally. And the question is why, and we don't know exactly why, but I can see certain reasons why, I must say. But I want to go through these changes a bit. And there are 2 issues. There are actually changes which he made, And there are problems that the changes he made, I think, how should I say, they were not expressed very carefully by him, perhaps. Perhaps they didn't even involve so much thought, perhaps. And when it was published, I do not believe that he paid very much attention to it. It was published as fantasy pieces, and it was written 40. I'm thinking all my dates are probably wrong now, off by a year, but I think it was 1918, not 1948. That would be a little bit farther off. 1848, I think, and it was published very soon after that in 1849. And then it was republished later, 1880, I think, as part of the complete works which Clara Schumann edited. Also as the fantasy pieces. Now, what is very nice is that we can actually see the manuscript online now. It's on IMSLP, so you just go and look at it. The manuscript is held in the Bibliothèque Nationale, and when originally I went with Ayako, we went to look at it. We had to go to Paris, and actually, what was nice is we could get photocopies of the manuscript. Yes, but the fact that our photocopies were in black and white, but what you have now, online is actually much more complex here. Starts here. You see, I have it here. And then we continue here. Okay, and you can see that he made many changes, many things. Do you see it here? Finally, and the final movement ends that way, which is crossed out, and this is the big. It's kind of not big, but little mystery, let's say. Yeah, that's crossed out, and then we have this. And if you notice, even just briefly now, let me go back. From here to here, you see, first this is dated. Oops. This is 1849, it's even 19th of February. So it's 49, and then it was published in May as fantasy pieces. So I was wrong about 48. I'm doing pretty well with this 1 year, one way or the other. Okay. Anyway, so that's that. Now we go to here, and we see that the handwriting is slightly different, although it is Schumann's handwriting. So this is the final ending, that is, which obviously he wrote afterwards, and it's also incredibly clean. We don't have anything else, no other source material. Then you do have the first edition, and then the later edition, as I was saying. Okay. So, the first thing I'm going to do is go over what were the changes that were made by him. And then I'm just going to show two details to see how, when it was published, the publisher made mistakes, which actually, in a way, changed the meaning of the piece, and not in a good way, I would say. Okay, so I have it's here with my changes, corrections. Well, the first thing is that there is, in the first movement, a first ending and a second ending here. And we start here from the See, that's the first ending, and then of course. And what is interesting here is in his manuscript, he does not repeat the octave. But just has the top G, which then is tied into that. So the transition is much more gentle.
We have to explain that there's a repeat in the first movement.
Yes, I thought I did.
I'm not sure.
No? Okay. So there's a repeat in the first movement. So the first movement goes from here, let's say, when we have that way. So that's the first ending that goes back, and then we have from here the second ending, which is the ending we know. With the only difference, no octave there, but then, which brings our resolution in C major to something which is much more inner, has a much more inner feeling, and kind of mysterious, perhaps. Okay, then there are little differences, because Schumann, of course, wrote in a way where often everything is in the piano, and the other instruments emphasize parts. So we have, in the final version, let's say, or the version which was published, we go from here, and then we have, and then we have here, and then we have here in the clarinet. But in the first version, we start this way, and then again, and then goes on, then no clarinet here, then we have this here. So that happens at the end of this phrase here, instead of the other part. So originally he had the sense of moving more to here. Sorry, from this place. To there. And in the published version, it had more a sense of closure at that moment. Okay, now we go on, and the recapitulation is fascinatingly different. And we go from here. And then this is his original. Which is quite extraordinary. I play this for you just one more time, just so that you can really hear how extraordinary it is, and how then the pianissimo which he writes at that moment makes so much sense. Okay, so once again we have this that way. Okay. Then the ending of this movement is also different, and this is interesting. And one thing to be aware of is here, the clarinet is alone, and then comes in here. Okay. And the original of this he has the piano play with the right hand alone, as the clarinet did going into the recapitulation. And that's actually rather interesting conception. So binding things together. So then we and then that way. It's very beautiful. I don't know if this is more compelling than the revision or not, but anyway, very interesting. Now the second movement, we have the most interesting part. There's one small thing we have in. And then here, which was published as that way, he actually originally wrote which, of course, comes out of that and creates a closer bond with this. Okay, but it's the ending of this movement which is extraordinary in a few ways. So we start here, and then we have this. And then this is the same. Then this is different. And then here we actually have this. And the reason we have that is that he actually writes here. Then he has. That was his original idea, in which case, of course, you need a G sharp. And here, though, is the most extraordinary part of this movement. We have this. It goes to the same. Then the G that we have, concert E continues. Then and then goes a tocca into the next movement. So what Schumann has done in this is we have going to this ending here, sorry, this moves that way, so that the ending of the second movement is in the second measure of the third movement. Okay, that's quite extraordinary, and I'm sure that that's why people looked at it and said, we better go that way. We better do that. He said, Robert, you know, maybe in 100 years that will be okay, but not now. Of course, he would not something like that. But anyway, but that is extraordinary. In the conception of that is extraordinary. This sense of connection between these movements that we have here, really, really quite amazing. So we have that. And then the last movement is the most interesting. And this is the part which I showed you, which is all crossed out. So we start here, then this is all the same. And then here, he goes into when you we go. And then again. And again. Then the same here. All the same. Sorry. Then here. And then we have this. Then here, going to here. And then the clarinet goes. That way. It's an amazing ending, and it's an ending that I felt, in a way, vindicated about, because when I was little, I didn't like this movement. And I didn't like this movement because somehow I was anti-plagal cadences. Let's go 4-1. I thought, something's wrong with this. Doesn't sound right. Of course, I mean, Brahms was a composer who could write plagal cadences in a very convincing way. But here, all of a sudden, we have a dominant. That way. So it's much, much stronger. Yeah. Now, what is extraordinary about this is that he ends this final movement with a recitative. So once again, I play for you. And then the clarinet. That way. And that's not only extraordinary, but also very interesting, because the first movement ends also with recitative. Because we have here Now, in the last movement, he first has the piano, then the clarinet playing. Here he has the clarinet play. And then the piano comes in. That way. So we see in the total picture of these three pieces how this first part relates to the last part in a way where our memory creates a total whole from these three separate movements. I mean, the conception, this original conception, is absolutely brilliant. The only problem with the ending of this, for instance, is that this here, and I don't have time, I won't play it on the clarinet, but you can understand it. This is, I'll just play on the piano what he wrote for the clarinet. There. All of a sudden I got myself confused with where I'm supposed to. Oh, that's because I have two different copies here. Sorry. So we have this. This is the clarinet part. We have here. That way. It's not really clarinet music, I would say, not really clarinet writing. It's also, if we look at the manuscript, we'll see, and it's hard to tell whether Schumann just didn't put it on the right staff, or whether he actually thought this way. But we actually have originally this in the piano, in this case. And we have the clarinet part in the clarinet line. That way. Again, it's not clarinet writing, and we wonder, if you look at it, you can see that it is possible that he just misplaced the line. And then he did switch things around there. But this ending is extraordinary, but again, not really perhaps suitable for the clarinet. So then, of course, he rewrote it, and it had some kind of public something. Oh, great. Let's do that, yeah.
Do you want to play?
Yes. This is
the last movement?
The last movement. Should we move on to the
Toward the end?
Yeah, I think so. We don't have so much time. Just so we can hear that.
At the end of
Of this, that's
Second
the third movement. Oh, go to the second movement. Yeah. And then the very end of the piece. Can they hear it okay? Is it? well, that's it. That's comes from a performance that Robert Levin and I gave on period instruments a few years ago. So I just want to mention just one detail more in this movement. And for this, I go back to the first movement just to mention, now to move to, I should say, mention move, to speak about the problem of publishers, of printing the music about it. And this has to do with this famous here, and maybe I actually play. I wonder if I can play. I have to transpose it though, right? And then we have the famous crescendo. My reed is so dry. But anyway. And that going there. And it's a small detail, but in fact very important, that crescendo is in the wrong place. And I will explain that to you right now. Here. Going back, taking this. Here. And I move back. Here. And if you understand, it's a little bit tricky to see. But here's, so let me see, we get a little bigger. But look at the hairpin. You see how the hairpin goes to the note. This is an A flat. And then back there. And notice how these two notes, this one and the piano, are in the same place. You see, so Schumann wrote generally his whole notes, long notes, in the middle of the measure, regardless of the fact that they begin, I should say, in the beginning of the measure. Okay? And what happened with publications? They kept this way, but here they moved this note to the front of the measure, and then move these to be more symmetrically in this measure. Okay? Now, why is this wrong in a very important musical way? Okay. First of all, and it's something that I ask people about, and I never get the right answer. I say, we have this, but where did that come from? This, in fact, is the essential motive of this piece. And then you have, again, from there. But we also have, it's a compound melody where he moves from the clarinet to the piano. And then back to the clarinet, and then we have again, you see. And then that gesture is always there. This kind of obsessive gesture in this piece, which we see not only as motive, but we see this as structure in the piece as well. So, in fact, we have this happening. That way. So when we generally hear this piece, we hear the melody as... And you wonder, wow, Schumann, that measure just writes one note in the melody. But in fact, that is the motive, which then should go away as... which then, of course, becomes... that, and then goes into the last movement. This is, like everything of Schumann, this is quite remarkable. It says, we see this. Okay. You know, I do want to move... What should I do? Because we started so late, I think, with this. What time do we have? 11:38. Okay, I think what I have to do is continue next week. Otherwise, I will be there. Of course, now we are the beginning of the school year, the beginning of the opening of everything, of people going out, people going out. So I'm not sure about how valuable the continuing our live streams will be. But I think at least what I should do, of course I have several more topics. I mean, it's kind of limitless. But what I will do is next week, I will finish this. And what I would like to do after that is I'm going to ask all of you, first of all, should we continue this? And also, if we should, you tell me some topics you would like me to discuss with you. And of course, I've been avoiding the topic of just for the clarinet double tonguing and circular breathing and different kinds of techniques on the clarinet, and I'll be very happy to actually work on those. Plus, all sorts of once again, technical issues. So, that said, please be well, be safe, be smart, and I will see you next week. Take care.